welcome. Today I'm going to be doing what several viewers have asked me to do, which is to demonstrate how I glue paintings onto panels. Now it's my frequent practice to just paint on loose primed canvas that's either pinned or stapled to a piece of plywood. And then when I get it to the point where I feel like it's almost done, or sometimes when it's completely done, then will be the time that I'll mount it to permanent support, which could be a variety of things. Now for something this small, I would probably choose this 1/4 inch, maybe it's a little thinner plywood. If it were a larger piece, something like this, I would probably choose a 1/2 inch plywood. Now this is a good quality plywood. It's known in the trade as Baltic Birch plywood, and it has no voids, and it's a little more expensive than what you'd find at the home center. So you probably have to get this from a woodworking or cabinet maker's supply. Beyond this size, I would tend to make up a panel that was the 1/4 inch stuff on the front, but in the back was cradled with a frame made out of pine. Now I'm fortunate enough that I have the workshop to make these myself, but of course, as you know, you can buy these ready-made also. Today though, I'm just going to, for a demonstration, mount this small piece onto this. And the first thing I have to do is release it from this board, and that's going to involve taking the staples out, for which I use this handy device. So there I've got that loose. And I should mention that by the time I get to this stage, the painting that I'm mounting is perfectly dry. I'm going to be turning this face down onto plastic, and so that's not really compatible with having thick paint on the surface. And that's one of the reasons that if I was planning to have thick paint, I might consider mounting this earlier in the process, that is before it was actually done, but when I had a pretty good sense that it was going to be a success and I was willing to, as it were, invest in the plywood or the mount. And I've covered this table with a fairly heavy plastic. I don't want it buckling or shifting or moving around too much. And I will be turning this face down to get glue on the back. So obviously my mission is to get glue onto this and get glue onto this and then put them together. But it's worth investing some time in making sure that the board lands in the right spot. So in this case, I actually can still see the lines of that I laid out before I started painting. I can still see the corners, so that's not too much of a problem. But if I hadn't done that, if it were just a loose painting and I wasn't even quite sure about where I wanted to crop it to fit onto the panel, I might do this little trick. These are getting kind of tired now, but I think you'll see the point. These are just, it's essentially mat board that I've separated into 2 big L's. And I can get my crop, I can find out exactly what size my destination panel is by bringing them up snug to the panel itself. I can put some tape at the overlap, and I will have created a temporary cropping device so that with my panel aside, I can put my artwork in there and visualize exactly where I want that crop to be. And it may be, since when I started painting this, that I will have changed my mind or see a slightly better crop and go with it then. But this is my chance to mark exactly where I want the corners to be and get everything lined up. Now having the marks on this side doesn't really do me a lot of good, and here is my solution for that. So I've got my pins, and I just now remembered this all goes simpler if there's something soft underneath to receive the pin, and I've got out some cardboard. But the principle is simply to find the corners in at your mat and poke them through the piece of canvas carefully. Then, if we've done this correctly, we can take off our temporary mat and just as carefully take up the canvas with the pins in it and flip it over. So we can see that the pins have pierced the canvas in the appropriate corners, and all that remains is for us to mark those corners, and I'll just go ahead and draw lines between them. So now, having marked a little crop mark to locate where my pins are poking through, and I've got that set, I can go ahead and take those pins out. But just to make it easy on myself, when it comes time to play with the glue, I'm going to get a straight edge and go ahead and connect these lines. Although actually, I guess I can just do it with my panel. That's looking good. So now, after all that, I know precisely where to park this panel once everybody's covered with glue. Like so. So let me lose this cardboard. Now the object of getting this glue on is to get good coverage across the panel and across the back of the canvas or the linen, certainly beyond the borders that you know it needs to go, and then get it on there, get it positioned, and then we're going to use a roller. And this is really more important with a larger piece than it is for this. But use a roller to work out any bubbles that might be caught in between. And once the glue makes its appearance, I like to have a damp rag on hand to wipe off the glue getting someplace I don't want it to be. The nice thing about this plastic is the glue can get on it, but it won't stick to it, and it won't stick any of my parts to itself either. So I wouldn't recommend doing this on paper, really. Plastic is really the optimal thing. And this glue in particular is water soluble, so I can almost clean up as I go just with a damp cloth. Now my spreader, in this case, is just a piece of plastic that was around the house. It's left over. It's actually stuff my wife uses to put on the bottom of the kitchen cupboard shelves, and it works well. But you could just as easily use a piece of mat board or anything stiff, although thin is nice, to spread this around. How much you pour out is something you just kind of get used to the feel of. But if you don't put out enough at first, you can always get more. And you just want to work it around. The objective with the linen is to make sure there's enough that it'll soak into the weave and still leave some floating on the surface. You don't want it all soaking in. If it all soaks in, you haven't put enough on. And it looks like I've made a pretty good guess about the amount I needed, but just a little more won't hurt. There's not an extreme rush with this, so you don't need to be in a panic. At least you don't need to be in a panic at this size. That's still not quite as much as I'd like. And the nice thing about having a plastic spreader is, of course, you can reuse it almost indefinitely. This glue will wash off of it with water. So there I've got that there, and there's still some sitting on the surface. Now we just need to do the same to the wood, and there's one last opportunity to decide which face you're going to cover up with the painting and which you're going to present to the world on the back. And you may decide that, you know what, nobody really needs to see that, so this is the side I'm going to put the painting onto. Therefore, glue on this side. That might be generous. When I found a product like this that I know I'm going to be using over and over and over again, I'll go ahead and buy large amounts. In this case, I buy it by the gallon. This gallon will last me probably a whole year, maybe longer. This is not soaking up a lot, and this is really a lot more glue than I wanted, so I think I'm going to offload some of this into the wastebasket. That's more like it. I've got kind of a skim coat everywhere now. And now I will attempt to put it on the back. And I'll have a little time to move things around. And that looks like it's gotten where I want it. Now, it's not too important here, but certainly if this was a large piece, it would be very important to notice I got some glue on the front of this, but it doesn't really matter because it's just going to come off with water. It's important, though, not to have any bubbles in there. And this is a hard roller intended for cabinet makers to put linoleum and such on countertops and then press very hard on it. But one of the hard speedball rollers would do nicely too. Now I expect some of the glue is oozing out on the other side, but there's nothing really wrong with that. I'm working from the middle out. And I'll have one last chance to check the other side to make sure it hasn't shifted. They should be good. Yeah, I'm still within my lines. Roll it from the back too if I want. Now ultimately I'm going to trim this off the excess with a razor blade, but in the short term I'm going to just make a compression sandwich. And because I don't want any of that glue sticking to anything else, I'm going to cover it with more plastic and then more weight. And normally I would just let that sit overnight, which I may do on this occasion, but in truth it'll probably be okay to trim out in a few hours. There's always the possibility that as the glue dries there's a little shrinkage, and I don't want to trim it off prematurely and have things shift after that, so I'll let this sit like this for a while. So now it's actually the next day, and all that really remains is for us to cut off the excess linen canvas from the edges of our panel. And I've just changed the blade in my utility knife. The glue is well set up. I don't detect any loose bits along the edges, so all that remains is to cut it out. As is the rule with a lot of cutting operations through thick materials, my first cut will be rather gentle and won't be trying to get through in one pass. It's almost more making a groove for the knife itself. And you may be running over little chunks of glue along the way, but just have patience, and within 2 or 3 passes you'll be clear. Light on the first pass, then you've really established a little bit of a track in the material, and after that it won't take much to complete the cut. So that's it. Clean edges, everything's nailed down, ready for a label and ready to pop into a frame. I hope you got something out of that. I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already, and maybe give this video a like, and I'll see you next time.